For nearly a century, a World War I mystery has been playing out on the Kamarooka farming estate on the New South Wales far south coast. In 1915, 22-year-old David Irvin left the farm to go to war. Until recently, the only evidence that David Irvin ever lived in this community was his name on the honour roll on the memorial erected by his fellow farm workers. Only 10 months after farewelling his family, he went missing at the Battle of Fromelles, a battle that lasted only over a single horrific night.
He actually was wounded in the shoulder prior to going back out. He was strapped up, sent back out, and then never seen again.
The following month, in August 1916, David's parents received a telegram from the army telling them that David had been wounded.
But there was nothing concrete, so a lot of worry in those days in a small community.
Believing that their son was wounded but alive, David's parents started to worry when his letters stopped arriving.
David had been a very good correspondent, and all of a sudden there was no word from him whatsoever, so his father wrote to the army. What could the army tell them about it?
The army, believing David to have been wounded, wrote back saying they were still looking into his condition and present whereabouts, and that in the meantime his parents' letters addressed to him should reach the soldier safely.
His mother wrote heartfelt letters asking for news of her son.
8 months after the battle, David Irvin's mother finally received a reply from the army.
I regret to state, previously reported wounded, now reported wounded and missing since 20th of July 1916. It must have been very, very difficult to still keep hoping, but you know, when you love somebody you just do keep hoping, and that's the human spirit.
The Battle of Fromelles, where David Irvin disappeared, was Australia's most costly military disaster. David was one of over 5,500 casualties, and many of them fell behind the German lines or in no man's land. It was difficult for Australian forces to know who was alive, dead, wounded or missing. But the German forces were meticulous with their record keeping at Fromelles. David Irvin was one of the Australian soldiers who had got through the German lines and was listed as dead.
At least his parents knew what had actually happened. But that's a long time to wait when you're worrying about somebody that you love. It's very hard.
But nobody knew where David Irvin was buried, and it would take another 90 years to solve that mystery. The breakthrough was in 2008 when a mass grave of Australian soldiers was discovered behind the old German trenches. The task then was to identify the bodies.
We were asked for DNA from a male relative, and all of a sudden, it was just within weeks, we heard that he had actually been identified. It was a very emotional feeling.
There was still one final mystery surrounding David Irvin's death. All the families of World War I soldiers killed in action received a medallion from King George, but David's had gone missing.
I had a call from a gentleman, unknown to me at the time, that he had found this medallion in David George Irvin's name.
David's parents would have received the medallion after he was reported killed in action. People used to call the medallion a dead man's penny. A new military cemetery was built at Fromelles. Rosemary and her sister-in-law Joan went there to represent the family at David Irvin's final resting place.
We walked around nearly the whole cemetery and finally found him. And when we got there, there ended up being 12 relatives who had come from Australia to be there.
David Irvin, the name on the memorial, had been found, and his family was there at his burial service.